Prisons are designed to isolate the most dangerous individuals from society. But what happens when those individuals are so terrifying that even fellow inmates fear them? Today, we will tell you about the most dangerous prisoners in the world, those who are still behind bars, and those who left a legacy of fear and infamy in history. Each of them is not just a name, but a story of brutality, crime, and an unparalleled impact on the world around them. Prepare to hear about people whose crimes were so horrifying that they forever altered the course of history. Carl Panzram, the embodiment of evil. The name Carl Panzram has become synonymous with cruelty. This man confessed to 21 murders and hundreds of assaults. But behind these numbers lies an even darker story. Born in 1891 into a poor family, Panzram faced violence from an early age. His early life was filled with beatings, homelessness, and petty crime. Panzram once declared, "I hate the whole human race and am glad that I can do even a little to destroy it." Panzram traveled across the United States and Africa, committing atrocities. His victims ranged from adults to children, and sometimes he destroyed entire families. He not only killed but also tortured his victims, seeking to inflict maximum suffering. One of his most shocking acts was setting a ship on fire with several people aboard. Even in prison, Panzram remained defiant and threatening. His incarceration was marked by constant conflicts with guards and other inmates. Once he attacked a prison warden, stating, "I don't fear death because I've already been dead to humanity for a long time." In his diary, discovered after his death, Panzram detailed his hatred for humanity and described his crimes in chilling detail. His words remain some of the most disturbing confessions in criminological history. His final words before his execution in 1930 were a challenge to the world. "Hurry it up. I could kill a dozen men while you're dallying." Al Capone, the godfather of organized crime. Alphonse Al Capone became the symbol of 1920s Mafia America. Born to Italian immigrant parents in New York, he quickly made a name for himself through ruthlessness, intelligence, and leadership skills. Chicago, the city he controlled, was rife with corruption and crime. His influence extended far beyond the city, encompassing an entire network of mafia organizations. Capone controlled prostitution, alcohol smuggling, gambling, and even the police. The Prohibition era became a goldmine for him as he monopolized the illegal alcohol trade. Capone was incredibly calculating. His criminal empire generated millions of dollars annually. He was loved by the public for his charity work, but was simultaneously considered the face of organized crime. He donated money to the poor and organized free meals for the homeless. However, behind the facade of philanthropy lay a man devoid of mercy. His rivals often disappeared under mysterious circumstances, and sometimes their tortured bodies were found. His most infamous act was the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, where 7 members of a rival gang were killed. Despite his vast influence and wealth, Capone was eventually arrested for tax evasion, the only crime authorities could prove. He spent several years in the infamous Alcatraz prison, where his health deteriorated significantly due to syphilis. After his release, he lived in seclusion in Florida, cut off from his once mighty empire. He died in 1947, but his name remains synonymous with the world of organized crime. Charles Manson, the guru of chaos and murder. Charles Manson is a name that has become a symbol of cult-driven evil. His family, a group of devoted followers, committed gruesome murders that shocked the world. Born in 1934, Manson spent much of his youth in reform schools and prisons. It was there that he began studying psychology and manipulation. He used his charisma and musical talents to attract people into his cult. Manson considered himself a messiah, a prophet of a new era. He convinced his followers that helter-skelter, an apocalyptic race war, was inevitable. To hasten this war, he orchestrated murders to frame African Americans and incite racial conflict. The murder of actress Sharon Tate, the wife of director Roman Polanski, became the most notorious crime committed by his group. At the crime scene, cult members left bloody messages to emphasize their ties to the coming apocalypse. Manson himself did not participate in the killings, but exerted such control over his followers that he was sentenced to life in prison. Manson died in 2017, remaining one of the most controversial figures in history. Even in prison, he continued to attract attention. His letters and drawings sold for thousands of dollars, and his image inspired artists, filmmakers, and musicians. El Chapo, the king of the cartel. Joaquin Guzmán Loera, known as El Chapo, was not just a drug lord, he was the head of an entire criminal empire. His cartel, Sinaloa, controlled a significant portion of drug trafficking into the United States. El Chapo was infamous for his ruthlessness and ability to evade capture. His methods of intimidation included public executions, torture, and even annihilation of the families of those who dared oppose him. El Chapo became famous for his incredible escapes. In 2001, he escaped from prison by hiding in a laundry cart. In 2015, his second escape shocked the world. A tunnel over a kilometer long, complete with ventilation and lighting, was dug beneath his cell. After his recapture in 2016, he was extradited to the United States, where he was sentenced to life imprisonment. In a high-security prison, he remains completely isolated from the outside world. Andrei Chikatilo, the Rostov Ripper. Andrei Chikatilo, one of the most infamous serial killers in Soviet history, murdered over 50 people over a 12-year period. His victims were mostly women and children, and his killings were marked by extreme brutality. Born in 1936 in a small Ukrainian village during a time of famine, Chikatilo's early life was shaped by deprivation and trauma. His family often told him horrifying stories about cannibalism during the famine, and he grew up in constant fear and insecurity. Chikatilo's method of luring victims was chillingly calculated. He would approach them at train stations or bus stops, often offering food or money. Once alone with his victims, he would attack with terrifying ferocity. Many of his crimes involve sexual violence, mutilation, and post-mortem defilement. Investigators were baffled for years due to the lack of evidence and Chikatilo's seemingly ordinary appearance as a family man and teacher. His arrest in 1990 was a result of tireless police work, including psychological profiling and undercover operations. During his trial, Chikatilo displayed erratic and bizarre behavior, including shouting obscenities and undressing in court. He was sentenced to death and executed in 1994. His case remains one of the most chilling examples of the depths of human depravity. Pedro Alonso López, the monster of the Andes. Pedro Alonso López is one of the most prolific serial killers the world has ever known, and his chilling nickname, the Monster of the Andes, reveals the horror of his crimes. Born in Colombia in 1948, López endured a childhood marred by abuse and violence. After his mother threw him out of the house at the age of 8, he joined a gang of street children and began a life of petty crime. It was during his adolescence that López first showed signs of the monstrous individual he would become. López confessed to killing over 300 young girls across Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. His method was calculated and manipulative. Posing as a traveling salesman, he would target girls from impoverished areas, often offering trinkets or sweets to gain their trust. Once in his grasp, López would lead them to isolated locations, where he committed acts of unspeakable violence. López was finally apprehended in Ecuador in 1980, after a massive effort by local authorities and the discovery of mass graves he had created. Although he confessed to his staggering number of murders, the justice system of the time was ill-equipped to deal with such a monster. Incredibly, after serving just 14 years, López was released on good behavior and subsequently vanished. His current whereabouts remain unknown, a chilling reminder of the flaws in the justice system. Albert Fish, the Gray Man. Albert Fish, also known as the Gray Man, was a figure so horrifying that he still haunts criminological studies. Born in 1870, Fish grew up in an unstable household, surrounded by mental illness and violence. As an adult, he blended into society as a quiet, unassuming man, until his crimes came to light. Fish preyed on young children, luring them with promises of food or employment. His acts were not only brutal, but also deeply twisted, involving sadistic torture and even cannibalism. One of his most infamous crimes was the murder of 10-year-old Grace Budd. After luring her away from her home, Fish wrote a detailed letter to her parents describing the horrific details of her death. Fish was finally arrested in 1934, following years of careful police work. His trial revealed the full extent of his depravity, horrifying the public and the jury. Fish was executed by electric chair in 1936, but his case remains one of the most grotesque in American history, sparking debates on the psychology of sadistic killers. Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. Ted Kaczynski, widely known as the Unabomber, was a brilliant mathematician turned domestic terrorist. His story begins with promise, a young genius who attended Harvard University at just 16 years old. But his academic brilliance masked a growing disdain for modern society. Kaczynski launched a nearly 20-year bombing campaign targeting academics, airlines, and corporations he believed were contributing to the destruction of the natural world. His homemade bombs were meticulously crafted, killing 3 people and injuring dozens. In 1995, Kaczynski forced major newspapers to publish his 35,000-word manifesto, Industrial Society and Its Future, which detailed his anti-technology philosophy. It was his own brother who recognized his writing style and turned him in. Kaczynski was arrested in 1996 at his remote Montana cabin, which was filled with bomb-making materials and journal entries detailing his plans. Sentenced to life imprisonment, Kaczynski continues to serve as a case study in the dangers of radical ideologies and the lengths some will go to act on them. Aileen Wuornos, the highway killer. Aileen Wuornos is one of the most infamous female serial killers in modern history. Born in 1956, Wuornos endured a childhood of severe abuse and neglect. By her teenage years, she was homeless, engaging in prostitution to survive. But it was during the late 1980s that her life took a deadly turn. Wuornos murdered 7 men along Florida highways, claiming they had either assaulted or attempted to assault her. She argued that her actions were in self-defense, but investigators found a pattern suggesting premeditation and robbery. Her victims were shot at close range, and their vehicles and personal items were often stolen. Her arrest in 1991 led to one of the most sensational trials in U.S. history, with Wuornos receiving 6 death sentences. She was executed by lethal injection in 2002. Wuornos' story has been depicted in films and documentaries, raising questions about her mental health and the role her traumatic past played in her crimes. Anatoly Onoprienko, the Terminator. Anatoly Onoprienko, nicknamed the Terminator, was one of Ukraine's most prolific serial killers, responsible for 52 murders in the 1990s. His spree was marked by extreme violence and a complete lack of remorse. Onoprienko would enter homes at night, slaughtering entire families indiscriminately. His killings often included arson, ensuring no one survived to identify him. His spree caused widespread panic in Ukraine, with many afraid to leave their homes after dark. After years of evasion, Onoprienko was finally caught in 1996. His trial revealed a chilling lack of remorse, with Onoprienko claiming he was fulfilling a destiny dictated by higher powers. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, where he died in 2013. His case remains one of the most horrifying chapters in Eastern European criminal history. These prisoners remind us of the darkness that can reside within humanity. Their stories serve as chilling reminders of the consequences of unchecked evil. While some are locked away, their legacies continue to haunt us. It is only through understanding their crimes that we can hope to prevent such atrocities in the future.